Welcome to another edition of the David and Goliath Podcast. I'm Matt Dolman here with my partner in crime, Stan Gipe, and we have with us our esteemed guest, Marty Gould. Marty, I've known you for several years now. Your career has been on kind of a meteoric rise. Catch us up to speed with give me like an overview of your overall practice. My listeners, my viewers out there not going to know what do you do?
Our firm handles primarily sexual abuse cases.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been doing it for over 10 years, and we are representing survivors of sexual abuse all across the country, seeking to get them compensation, but also closure and to change policies and procedures to help protect the next generation of children.
Understood. Give me, and I know it's going to sound odd. Obviously, it's patently obvious based on the question, but what is different about a sexual abuse case versus like a personal injury case besides stating the obvious? What makes a sexual abuse cases so different? Meaning that if I'm a client, if I'm a consumer and I'm a survivor, or I have a family member who is a sexual abuse survivor and I'm looking to pick the right lawyer, I know that I refer all my cases to you. And there's a reason why, because I think you're one of the best lawyers in the country, bar none. I think your firm is as well. But a consumer is not going to know that without having the proper information and ammunition. They're going to think all lawyers are the same or all personal injury lawyers are the same. What makes it different?
You're too kind, Matt. But to answer that question, I think the first thing that comes to mind is the nature of the harm, the injury. Sexual abuse, scars the soul. It scars the psyche. It's something that a jury is not going to see as soon as you walk into a room, as soon as you walk into a courtroom, like you would if it was a catastrophically injured person from a work accident who might be in a wheelchair or might have a cast on their arm. But the nature of the injury is very, very serious. It's catastrophic. It's lifelong. It's something that sticks with people throughout their entire lives. It manifests in many different ways. People are impacted differently. There's a lot of the same types of injuries in terms of post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety disorder, flashbacks, nightmares, cold sweats, things that trigger the trauma to come back. But there's also, the increased likelihood of somebody getting involved in the cycle of crime, anger issues, being overly aggressive as a way to kind of overcompensate with things that happened in the past, because in their minds they are telling themselves, I will never let somebody do this to me again. And they were just innocent children when it happened, and now they're adults and they're fighting back, and sometimes that can lead to trouble. So I think the number one thing is the nature of the harm and how that's impacted people throughout their entire lives in many different ways.
So, I'm going to transition. I know Stan's got a bunch of questions too, but when we talk about sexual abuse, you hear terms like trauma-informed advocacy. What does that mean? Why would a regular personal injury lawyer not be able to handle a sexual abuse case? Now they can handle it, and I could just say to my clients, they're going to fuck it up. But how do you say that in a less emphatic way, in a more professional way? What's different? What are you able to do? What does trauma-informed advocacy actually mean? And how does it help a client, especially a sexual abuse survivor, in order to avoid re-traumatizing the survivor, in order to avoid having them to go back through the same experience again?
It's a recognition of how sexual abuse impacts people in lawyering in that way. So it starts with the intake process, asking open-ended questions. Survivors can range from those that are suicidal, that can't even talk to you about what happened and it's a loved one that's calling, to those that want to be out in public advocating for changes, calling out their abusers, and talking to the media about the need for change. And that's a pretty wide spectrum. So it's important for those that are speaking with the survivors at any point of the stage of a case or even the vetting process, to understand how that abuse impacts people, to understand why people don't come forward right away. Most survivors never come forward, and the ones that do are statistically in their late 40s, early 50s. That's after they've been through the hell of perhaps drug addictions, many divorces, all sorts of other problems that they've endured throughout their lives, and they're finally in a space where they feel like they can come to terms with what happened. right? It's important to understand that. So when you hear a survivor saying, I haven't reported this to anybody and it happened 10, 15, 20 years ago, that's normal, right? And there's science behind that, and that happens. So it's understanding the nuances of how the abuse impacts somebody and incorporating that into the lawyering aspect of it, and then also offering the resources. We've had clients that have called, and part of the job, sometimes can be a therapeutic, guider throughout the process, where you're linking your clients up with very good therapists or nonprofits that can hook them up with treatment. Sometimes you're talking to family members about things that they can do to help support that survivor through this process and help win the case and get closure. So it's important to understand holistically how the abuse impacts the survivor so you can adequately represent them throughout the case.
So does it seem like, do most clients or sexual abuse survivors or their family members, so I'm going to just use the nomenclature clients, are they looking to be able to move on, have closure? Are they looking for a pound of flesh? What are most clients looking for? And is it a generalization? There's no one size fits all?
I think it's the latter, right? People come forward for many different reasons. I think everybody that comes forward does want to protect the future generations of children. They want to make some difference, and that helps with them in terms of the motivation to keep going through what can sometimes be a difficult process, is that they know that they're helping others so that others can hopefully be, so others don't have to go through what they went through with children, right? Some people, they do want closures. They want to reclaim their lives, right? Something that they buried deep inside that they were ashamed of, that they felt humiliation over. And being able to stand up for the first time and confront the abusers or the enablers and say, this did happen to me and I count, that they're being counted, that means something, right? And that's a very important part of the process is reclaiming the lives back for the survivors and helping them try and get closure. And then there's the financial component to it, which is they have been through a lot. It's impacted them in many different ways. And to give survivors the ability to focus on their mental health, to focus on their families, the important relationships in their lives, that you need money for that, right? Instead of worrying about making your next paycheck or paying your next bill, the financial component of the case is important too in terms of giving survivors the opportunity to heal.
Understood. Stan, I feel like I'm dominating this, so I'm going to defer. I can always call Marty up and talk to him one-on-one anytime. You go, Stan.
Well, I can pretty much talk ad nauseum if you give me a mic. I'm happy to go, but really, okay. So Marty, look, we do a lot of this, and as attorneys, right? We got a lot of roles for people, but primarily our role is to make people whole for what's happened to them. Do our best within the legal system to do what we can to compensate people in any way possible for what's happened to them. Unfortunately, right, in our legal system, in our system, the really main way we can do that is money. We got no way to undo the wrong. We just don't have that, right? And in some of our cases, like when you're talking about, cases driven by physical injury, a lot of times jurors can see that if you've got a paralyzed person sitting in this chair, a juror, someone's going to be able to see that throughout the trial. They're going to be able to almost put themselves in their shoes, even if you don't ask them to, right? When we're dealing with victims of sexual abuse, these, a lot of times these damages aren't as outwardly visible, right? They're not as self-explanatory to a jury. All of us have, suffered a headache, so we can kind of say, oh, a migraine would be horrible. Most of us, thankfully, haven't been the victim of a sex assault. And if we've not been the victim of sort of a real trauma, how is it that you go about, kind of educating people to what it's like for these survivors so they can really kind of understand? Because, mental health is not as obvious as physical health. And I feel like it takes a little more work to get a fact finder or decision maker to really understand what's going on. How do you go about doing that?
There's so much good literature out there, studies about how sexual abuse impacts people, how especially how child sexual abuse impacts people. And I think the analysis in that story starts with, what does the literature say? The general causation. Sexual abuse, we know, can impact the brain development for children. When you're developing, when you're a kid and you're in that constant fight or flight mode, that impacts how your brain forms, because it's not forming in a healthy, natural way. You're constantly in fear because of the abuser. There's science behind that. We've had cases where we've had clients undergo brain scans in blood tests to show that they also had increased cortisone levels, right, in their blood, and in different ways in which it impacts you. But it starts with a general causation, understanding of all the different ways, the increased likelihood of being involved in criminal activity, lashing out against your authority figures, having problems keeping a job, lost earning capacity, lost education, right? When you're being sexually abused and horrific things are happening as a kid, most of those children don't just go to class the next day and focus how a normal kid would, right? Who many kids normally have difficulty focusing as is. I've struggled with that too. But to have to endure that type of abuse and then go back to school, people get that. The science supports it. So you start with all the different ways in which abuse impacts people, and then you look at your client and you talk to them about the different ways in which it's impacted them. And do you get nightmares? Check. Flashbacks? Check. Did you have trouble focusing in school when this happened? Yeah, you're going to find out a lot of these kids dropped out of school. Their grades fell. Do you have trouble keeping a job? Trouble with authority figures? Do you have you struggled with if you're abused by a medical care professional, going to hospitals or getting the treatment and getting the psych treatment you needed because you were being abused in a mental health facility? How are you going to go out there and go trust another counselor again? Right? So you go through all the different ways in which it impacts survivors and from the studies compared to your client. And then it's about telling that story. Many survivors haven't underwent the treatment they need, right? So you recommend that they undergo treatment, which can really help a lot, even though people are busy or they don't have funds for it, and you want to try and find them treatment. And typically you'll get a therapist who's going to say, what, you have post-traumatic stress disorder, or all these different things that have impacted them throughout their lives can be tied to the sexual abuse they endured as kids. The many divorces, the problems holding jobs. You have a medical professional who does it. There's typically a few family members or coworkers or other lay witnesses in their lives that can help tell that story. They may never have known about the abuse, but perhaps they can shed light about the impact of the abuse. And so those are all different ways in which you kind of dig into what happened to your client, how it's impacted them as compared to the literature and the studies, and then getting the anecdotal stories of that from loved ones. It's not always so easy for a client to tell the whole story of how it really impacted them. Sometimes you can learn a lot more by listening to others.
Mm-hmm. And we call it before and after witnesses, like in the personal injury context. But Stan, you're about to say something. I apologize.
Yeah, well, I was also going to kind of hit on something, right? These injuries percolate over time with people, right? There, you've got victims of childhood sex abuse, right? And this injury doesn't just sit there. It's not stagnant. It kind of grows. It infects their life and kind of causes, other issues as these people mature. Right. So sometimes these people, victims aren't coming forward right away. It's rare the 12-year-old is coming forward at 14 without a supportive environment around them. Right. They're whatever's going on, they kind of keep it to themselves. And we've had people that have been shocked, that have called our office to find out they could still make a claim sometimes 20 years later. Right. Some states have discovery statutes and things like that. Can you hit on that a little bit? How, as we go across the nation, people really, there are some states with really broad statutes of limitations where you can bring these claims 20, 30 years after they happen. So people need to think before they just assume that it's too late to bring a claim for what's happened to them. Isn't that right?
100%, Stan. The laws in many states were very unfair for a long time, where you had 2 years from after you turned 18 to file a lawsuit. many survivors, those survivors don't come forward because of the humiliation, the shame, the embarrassment. They bury it. Perhaps they were threatened by the abuser. In a lot of cases, the abuser is somebody who's an authority figure. It could be a priest, a coach, a teacher, a counselor. We have cases where the abuser says, no one will believe you. Oftentimes they're preying on people that already have serious vulnerabilities. Perhaps they were at a mental health facility and they really did need treatment, right? They're already struggling with demons or behavioral issues or mental health issues. And that's part of the reason they're targeted. We're in the juvenile detention center where people are trapped in a facility and perhaps they've gotten in trouble and now it's a guard who's preying on them. And the guard's telling them, who's going to believe you over me, right? And so there's many reasons that people really understand and appreciate as to why survivors don't come forward. And there's been a movement across the country to change statute of limitations laws to make them more fair. There's also case law in a lot of states that has appreciated the fact that many survivors either repressed the memory or didn't fully appreciate that they were being abused at the time. If it was, the doctor sexually abusing someone under the guise of providing necessary medical care, but also fraudulent concealment. People may have known that the abuser abused them. They had no clue. It never crossed their mind that the leaders of the church knew about the predator, that there was other reports about him, and they allowed him to stay in ministry with access to kids. Never crossed the parents' mind that could possibly happen. People didn't appreciate that a guard who was abusing them, that there was a whole bunch of other kids that were abused by the same guard. Supervisors knew about it. There's other complaints. That ties in the culpability of the institution. And a lot of those institutions then covered it up. They minimized it. They didn't want the public to know about what happened. That's called fraudulent concealment.
Mm-hmm.
They are hiding highly relevant evidence so the public doesn't find out, so the victims don't find out about their culpability. And they do it all the time for many reasons, for financial reasons, to keep their jobs, and there's a lot of states in the country that recognize that and say, that's not fair. You can't hide evidence that shows your culpability and then think you can just wash your hands of it. And so a lot of survivors can pursue claims under fraudulent concealment tolling theories.
We're seeing that systemic in the Latter-day Saints litigation. I mean, that's what we're heavily involved with, and that just seems to be endemic in the culture of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Stan, I'm sorry, you were going to say something.
No, I was going to say there's also sort of a second aspect of it where people don't even realize that the injuries and the things they're going through in life are related to this early trauma. I can tell you, we've had conversations with clients where we've kind of gotten into what happened, and I can still remember one of them going, I never really thought about it. Maybe this is what's causing me to have problems when I'm trying to be intimate with my wife, right? And it may be 20 years after the abuse, and these people are just starting to connect the dots. And there are also states that recognize discovery rules, like, hey, even if this happened 20 years ago, if you're just figuring out what happened to you, you may still have a claim. You just need to do it within a certain amount of time of when you figured it out. Right. I mean, so, I think the overall arching theme to this, and kind of what I want to get across to anyone listening, is don't just assume because you've waited a long time to make your claim that you can't make your claim. You want to call someone, you want to have people look at it. Every claim is different. And each fact pattern may give rise to things, a victim's not thinking about. So, a lot of people don't call because they think it's been too long. And I just want to kind of let them know that's not always the case. And half the times people are surprised to find the ways we're able to bring claims for them, even years after it's happened.
Stan, there's also a lot of changes in the laws. What's called the look-back windows or revival windows, where Democrat or Republican states, people want to do right by survivors, and laws are changing where it creates a window where even if your statute of limitations was expired, you have 1 year or 2 years to file a lawsuit if it arises out of child sexual abuse, right, or sexual abuse. and there's a huge movement across the country to change laws and make them more fair.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a partisan issue. That's the one great thing about doing work on behalf of survivors, is that Democrats, Republicans, Independents, everybody hates pedophiles. They hate people that enabled abusers, and people do want to do right by them.
I would argue that those cases are often just as strong in red jurisdictions as they are in blue. And it's kind of want to segue into another topic. So, Marty, you left a prominent Chicago firm maybe 2.5 years ago and started Gould, Greco, Hensley. I want to segue into a new area of practice that you've kind of gone into. It's not really new per se. It's sexual abuse, but it's sexual predation on digital platforms. And you're one of the leading voices out there in the cases against Roblox, Discord, Snap. I know you're focusing right now on Roblox, where you just were appointed. Congratulations. You were appointed by Judge Seaborg to leadership in the MDL. And for those who don't understand what MDL is, multi-district litigation, where all lawsuits federally are consolidated in front of one judge. Give us an overview of sexual predation on digital platforms. What is unique about those type of cases? What do parents need to know about these platforms?
Thanks, Matt. Well, there's a group of a lot of tremendous lawyers that have come together. Matt's up front in that group, and then Steven's heavily involved. Lawyers that have represent thousands of survivors. And this is a process that started over time where one after another, law firms were getting calls about horrific things happening on Roblox, which is the #1 online gaming app in the country. It was advertised as being an educational platform. In fact, they had partnerships with a number of school districts. Their website touted, quotes from MIT grads about how it can teach kids coding. It's not just a fun game. It's not just playing, N64, Mario Kart. It's educational. A lot of parents were then throwing their kids at the game, saying that's great. Parents had no clue that their 8-year-old kid could be speaking to a 40-year-old man who's, a predator, and that their kid was being groomed for weeks or months by some adult super predator. And unfortunately, there's countless stories of that, where children were being manipulated on the platform, exploited on the platform. In some cases, it started with Roblox, and then they were moved on to other platforms such as Discord or Snap. And in some horrific cases, they were physically, sexually abused or kidnapped. For finding out that there were reports about it, that Roblox knew about a predator problem.
How do we know that?
Complaints were being made. Law enforcement was getting involved. This goes back in terms of the number of people that were being abused. This starts from the early days of the platform, right? And that there was alternative safety features that competitors were using that they weren't using. And it was all driven largely by increasing the value of the company, right? The metrics for the investors are the higher number of users, the greater potential of the business. And that's what was driving a lot of these bad decisions that put lots of children at risk. And here we are. We're still in the fight, Matt and Stan included, and countless other firms that are committed to the cause of doing right by the victims. And I haven't heard one time since the beginning of this case where Roblox's executives have asked, how are the victims doing? How is Jane Doe or John Doe, person that is alleged to have endured horrific abuse?
Well said. So, a couple of more points I just want to make about Roblox, and I want to get into some of your biggest successes lately before we wrap this episode. But when we're looking at digital platforms, a lot of viewers out there are going to go, well, where were the parents? Where were the parents monitoring the children? I know that, as a father of 4 kids, my kids were on the Roblox platform until I decided to get involved in this case. And I decided to get involved in this case when I read the Bloomberg expose calling Roblox a pedophilia hellscape, a haven, a fertile hunting ground for sexual predators and deviants. What do we say to those individuals out there, though? When we look at any article, every article will have the comment section. Most people shouldn't troll in the comment section. I tend to do that. Probably a shocker based on my personality, but you go in that comment section and everyone's, where are the parents? What are they doing? What do we say to that?
Parents were lulled into a false sense of security. That's
why
one of the most important parts of this case. When you're out there, when the company's out there saying it's educational, it's safe for kids, state-of-the-art safety features, it never crossed the parents' minds that there were predators, that there was these adults on there preying on their kids, right? There's a tremendous failure to warn. And when parents don't know about the threat, then they can't prepare for the threat, right? And that's one of the significant parts of this case is that Roblox knows better. They're in this industry. They know about these problems. They've known about them for a long time. And as years go on, they know more and more about them. When did they start warning the parents? When did they start warning the users? Because once people start having more information about it, they can then start preparing or thinking about how they can protect their children. But a lot of parents don't have an understanding of all the different default features and things like that. They just are assuming that there's no way that there's these adults on there preying on their kids, right? That their kid, Johnny's speaking his buddies on there, right? And that's that.
But behind the anonymity of an online figure could be a 40-year-old man like myself talking to the child. I get that. That. Good point,
and when did Roblox know about that, right? Did they know that was a thing? That's something that was a legitimate problem that's been on these apps, right? And then why did they lull parents into a false sense of security?
So quick segue. Last night I'm staying at home with my wife, and we're going through all the bills. I tend to spend too much money. And I'm thinking to myself, who I can call for financial help? Mayor fucking McCheese, Marty Gould, got $17.5 million settlement last month. Tell us about that, man. That is incredible. You're one of the better attorneys in this country, and you should take a bow. You tend to be very, very modest, and you don't have a lot of enough gusto and energy about your successes, Marty. What happened in that case? How'd you get a $17.5 million settlement, big fella?
It was a horrific case where
I'm not trying to make light of the case. I'm just celebrating your success because obviously something horrific had to occur in order to obtain compensation to that amount. But not every lawyer could do that too.
It was a Chicago public school abuse case. In some states, a lot of states, if the case involves like a municipality, you can't get punitive damages, which is extra compensation to punish. The same applies in Illinois, but we really dug up the liability part of that case and told a compelling story about how it impacted our client, and ultimately it settled an hour before the trial started. It was a long journey for the client, who came forward many years after the abuse occurred, reported to law enforcement over the past few years. That was a criminal case that ultimately led to the perpetrator's criminal arrest and conviction through a criminal trial. So he was sentenced to 22 years in prison. Our client went through a lot. She had to not just report to law enforcement, she had to sit through a criminal case where, her credibility was attacked. Her character was attacked. And then we went through this civil case where our client reported that she told another teacher about it. Through the case, we had learned that teacher had allegations involving misconduct with minors. She was being investigated. And through years of litigation, up until an hour before trial, we ultimately resolved the case for an amount that we thought was fair for the client. Can't undo what happened, but the next best thing is to get the client financial compensation so they can focus on their healing.
Thank you for what you do, Marty. Seriously, great work.
Marty, all right. So if anyone knows who's seen the news, right, there's some firms in LA that are getting in trouble or being accused of representing fraudulent claims on some juvenile detention cases. How is it that you as a firm police your own inventory to make sure and ensure that the people you're representing are truly victims and they're not just people who claim to be victims but didn't have anything happen to them?
I think it's important, one, for any law firm that has any advertising, you have to pay attention to what the advertising is. If you see a advertisement where there's a cat dancing or somebody dancing in a video and it's about sexual abuse, a huge red flag, right? I don't think true survivors are calling firms that have those types of advertisements. And I don't see many of them, but to the extent somebody sees that, it's probably not a firm that somebody wants to call and have represent them in a very serious matter. Okay, because these are very serious matters, and that's why they're taken seriously. There's, it's the process should weed out the fraud. I'm very confident that there are processes that can ensure that it's really the survivors, true survivors, are the ones that are compensated. There's a lot of different things that go through that process in terms of records verification, interviews with the survivors, things like that. But sometimes, and I don't think it's that common. In the rare circumstances, there are people that perhaps weren't in fact abused. In the process, should weed it out, right? And it's important that firms go through a process to make sure that those that are true survivors, and that's the overwhelming majority, are the ones that they're pushing forward and filing cases for, and that are advocating for.
Hey, Marty, thanks for coming on. It's always a pleasure getting guests like you. Your expertise in the sex abuse arena is nearly unmatched amongst our legal peers in this arena. So it's a pleasure getting you on. Matt and I know I speak for both of us, saying we're very thankful that you took time out of your day to be with us. This has been another edition of the David vs. Goliath podcast. I'm Stan Gipe here with Matt Dolman. It's always a pleasure to have anyone listen to us. If you've got any questions, you can always find us on our website, call, and Marty, right? How do people find you if they want to locate you?
You can go to our website, gghlaw.com, or they can call you guys up. Thanks so much for the work that you guys do, and for raising awareness about these important cases.
Thanks, Marty. We appreciate you coming on.